Disinformation is rampant and dangerous. In fact, BuzzFeed goes so far as to say that disinformation broke the United States in 2020. That's at least the premise behind a new article looking at how widespread lies have divided the country. The report looks at misleading claims surrounding everything from the coronavirus to Black Lives Matter protests to claims of voter fraud in the presidential election. BuzzFeed senior reporter Jane Lytvynenko wrote that article, and she joins us now. Hi there, Jane. Thanks for being with us. Disinformation is obviously nothing new. Conspiracy theories have been going around forever, but there's something that has changed. Are things just being amplified by social media, or is something else going on?
Well, it's a really complex interplay of how disinformation works. The first thing that we need to understand is that even though disinformation has always been a reality, social media companies supercharged it. So now a message can blaze through social media much faster than it would have without it. And the stopgap measures that social media companies have put in place have worked in some ways, but haven't worked in other ways. But there's another important aspect to this, which is that politicians have taken online rumors and amplified them to their constituents. So rather than seeing a conspiracy that maybe seems outlandish to you online, now you're seeing that conspiracy repeated by a person who has the trust of their electorate. So that 1-2 punch is incredibly powerful and has really helped supercharge how many falsehoods, not just conspiracies, but also just things that are false, people believe in.
What are some of the most damaging and defining disinformation campaigns over this past year? Which ones really not only gained root, but fundamentally had a negative effect on our society?
When the UN used the word infodemic, they were talking about the coronavirus. Of course, that's the crisis that met us at the beginning of the year, and as that crisis even was just leaving China before it got to U.S. shores, we already saw a huge amount of disinformation surrounding it. And it was undermining faith in scientific institutions, as well as medical professionals who very seriously feel this on the ground. A lot of this was politically motivated, but some of it was also financially motivated. And it was at a time when we didn't know much about the virus, so it did some really serious damage to America's healthcare institutions and science belief. But the other important part of this is the Black Lives Matter protests that we have seen this year have also been a huge target of disinformation campaigns. Peaceful protesters were painted as violent. One-off acts of violence were painted as widespread. And Mr. Trump actually used this during his campaign. He put out advertisements that blamed so-called Democrat cities burning. He attacked Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as if they spoke for the movement, and they didn't. And so they undermined the basic right to protest, the basic right of Americans to stand up for their rights. And all of that became compounded during the election when Mr. Trump and his supporters attempted to undermine the results of the election and the basic right of Americans to have their ballot counted.
I'm wondering, is fighting disinformation self-defeating? I've heard a lot of times that you can't fight against people who believe in these incorrect pieces of information with facts, that it just causes folks to further retreat into their beliefs. So how do we tackle this as a society?
It's a really difficult question, and there's no silver bullet for how we fix the entire disinformation problem. Of course, some responsibility lies on social media companies and on legislators to see if they could come up with solutions. But at the same time, we need to understand that disinformation builds on existing gaps, and we need to gap, whether that's racial injustice, whether that's health system mistrust, whether that's now mistrust in democracy. really what's important to note is that not every person who believes in a piece of disinformation is too far gone and unreachable. We need to have these difficult discussions with one another, with our friends and our family, and not just people who are extremely committed to the conspiracy theories that they've been presented with, but also people who see one-off pieces of misinformation and maybe use that to color their actions.
All right, Jane Lytvynenko, thank you.
Thank you for having me.